Hi, I'm Catherine Vesilopoulos. Starting my own venture wasn't easy. After a decade working in the corporate world, I realized that so many things were out of my control, like layoffs and changes in direction. I didn't like the instability. I didn't want that to define my whole career and professional story. And so I left. I started my own company and achieved more than I ever imagined. Now I'm on a mission to share stories from extraordinary entrepreneurs who are changing the world and who never gave up on their vision. Work-life balance doesn't exist. What does exist is work-life integration. This, according to today's guest, Margery Kraus. Finding ways to naturally integrate every part of your day is the key to a happy life at home and behind the desk. And Margery is a living testament to this idea. With a career spanning more than 5 decades, Margery has received every major award in the communications world. She founded APCO Worldwide in 1984. Today, it's the 5th largest independent PR firm in the US and the largest in the world that's majority women-owned. Of course, working as a woman in a male-dominated field since the 70s meant facing many challenges. She's overcome condescension, bullying, even betrayal. But through it all, Margery's family and children have been there to help support her and help her grow. Her book, Roots and Wings, covers 10 key lessons she learned as a mother that helped her to become a PR powerhouse. Hello, Margery. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's talk about your story. Give me a brief overview of your story, Margery.
Grew up in this small town. I went to school and something extraordinarily bad happened to me when I was about 14. My mother's youngest brother, who was only 7 years older than I was, his name is Sammy, came and he lived with us because he needed a different climate. And when he was 21, he got cancer and he died. And had a profound impact on my life. I sat with him almost every day till he died, and I was only 14. And I realized that if I was going to die when I was 21, I wasn't going to waste a day. And so I ended up going to Europe to be an au pair for the doctor who took care of him because they thought that would be good therapy. And I traveled around Europe myself, and I came home and said, I'm a junior. I'm just going to leave school and go to college and go faster. And that's what happened. I convinced several colleges to take me after my junior year and never got my high school diploma at that time. I got it after I got my master's. I had been going to summer camp as a counselor, and I met my future husband, and he was in law school in Washington, and we got married in my senior year of college. Now my parents are saying, oh God, she didn't graduate high school. Now she's not going to graduate college. This is a disaster, because they had all these high hopes for me. And it was like, what are you doing? And then I had my first child and had a second child. And then there was a successor organization called Close Up. When I called Close Up, they had no jobs. And I said, okay, I know how to do this. I know exactly what you need. And I'll give you a money back guarantee if it doesn't work. The rest, I've worked like every day since then.
And the name of the book is Roots and Wings. Where does that concept come from? Why did you name the book that?
Roots and Wings came from the fact that when my kids were growing up, I have 3 children, and I had a sign on the wall that there are only 2 lasting things of value you give your children. One is roots and the other is wings. And as I grew my company, since we were in so many countries with so many different kinds of people would say, I was just in your office in Germany, and it felt like I was in the same office. You know, how do you have a global company where it's one culture? How do you do that? And I started to think about it, and I realized that I was building the company the same way I raised my kids, which is that having one central set of values for the company, and then giving people freedom in a framework. If people believe in the set of values, if you're aligned on kind of the mission and the values of the company, then you can give people freedom to operate.
That goes back to your whole concept of work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance. There's this, you're
Yes,
making a
I
distinction.
just don't believe that there's work-life balance. I think anybody who tries to live their life that way is doomed to a lot of stress, unnecessary stress, and feeling of failure. I think that on any given day, one or the other wins out. And so it's a matter of how you bring these things together and what you can do to make things a little bit easier by thinking about what you do at work and how you can integrate any kind of interest in your family or vice versa. There are little things like even traveling and bringing home money in a foreign currency and having that help with math. There's just my grandchildren, when I was traveling, they had they were homeschooled, or several of them were homeschooled. And they had a big map on the wall about tracking where I was going. And so there are all kinds of ways. You don't have to do something elaborate, but it's a mindset of not creating an artificial separation. And also, again, communication is really important. We try to say, okay, what are the must-haves here? So if somebody was in a school play and it was really important for me to be there, I would find every way in the world I could to be there, but I might miss something else, and I would explain why I missed it.
The parallels that you draw between your life as a mother and your life as a business owner are incredible throughout the book. There's this constant propelling motion. Can you tell us more about what those lessons were? Because you could transfer your lessons from motherhood to work and vice versa.
My mother always used to say, where there's a will, there's a way. And so I think one thing I learned is that to be an entrepreneur, you have to really will things to happen and not taking no for an answer, figuring out how do you get to yes. One of the it wasn't funny when it happened, but one of the funny chapters as I look back was the one that says, stop whining or no whining.
Yes, no whining.
Yes. And so for me, I said, okay, I broke this rule because it was all about raising capital and the way you get treated as a woman, especially in the years I was doing this, when you go out to get capital. And so I had plenty to whine about, and I did whine. It almost killed me at one point. But I do think it's important looking back on that you learn to be a little tougher and you learn this isn't personal.
Yes, and you started working in the 1960s and you were already a mom, and you were working at a time where it wasn't necessarily popular, or people were telling you things about the fact that you were a mom and you were also working. Was that difficult for you?
That might be an understatement. There were a few things that were hard. I think one was that society wasn't ready for any kind of change in roles, I guess you'd say, between men and women. And I'm married to the same person for 57 years. So he was very self-confident. So if he went to the parent-teacher conference and he was the only guy in the room, it didn't bother him. If he ended up doing the food shopping and helping out, it didn't bother him really. And it was a partnership. And I think he got a lot out of it because the children certainly at that time saw him. We were interchangeable except for certain things that your kids want to discuss. Some were better for him, some were better for me. The pressure that was external to this did not help people asking why I never did carpools or things of that sort, which made them feel badly. But I think in general, what it did is it brought us much closer as a family, and we were each other's support system. I couldn't have done this without my kids and my husband, and the kids learned to be very independent so that when they left the house, they were actually a lot more competent to be on their own, which was a gift that I didn't realize. All those years of feeling guilty, I never realized I was actually helping.
And it seems to me that it would ground children in some reality that mom or dad aren't always going to do exactly what you expect them to do. And they're human. They have priorities and obligations too. And it helps your children grow up in a more realistic way.
I think it also lets them know maybe that you have to be responsible and accountable for certain things in life, and it's not always convenient. I think they're all life lessons. And I've really I think grandchildren, the kids have a sign on the wall that it's your gift for not killing your kids. But I think it's more, I think it's more than that. And I think that you're more relaxed with your grandchildren. You get to enjoy it more. And I think some of my greatest joys in my working life too have been to be able to include them in things that I've done. With my family, we would have family meetings. Communication was really at the center of this. And I would do things that we would think of together. And one of those things ended up being that when my kids were 10, I took them on a business trip. And I used 10 years old because then I had an excuse to take one at a time, knowing the other two would know their time would come. And so we went to Colorado and they saw the Rocky Mountains and they went to work with me. And I think they learned that work was work and they were very proud. In fact, at one point, my son, who's the middle child, I had to give a speech. And at the end of the speech, he was like in the front row, he jumped up in his chair and he starts applauding. It was cute, but it was really embarrassing too. But it really, I think, gave them a sense that I was doing things that people appreciated and were important. And I think it was a good life lesson.
Absolutely. When you're a child and an adult takes you on a journey somewhere, if you're at an age where you can remember, like those memories have been formed, you'll never forget that trip, ever. My parents took us to Greece when we were 11, and I still remember the smells in the village. It's the combination of jasmine trees and goat poop. I don't know how else to explain it.
But you know, that's so true, because when my youngest grandchild was 9, my oldest grandchild was 9, her name's Nina, she called me and she said, I'm going to be 10 on my next birthday. And it had been 31 years since her mother's 10-year-old trip. And her mother was never the kind of person that would say, that was fantastic. She just absorbed it. And so she said, I'm going to be 10 on my next birthday. I said, Nina, that's what happens after you're 9. And she goes, no, it's time for my 10-year-old trip. And I was so taken aback that I was speechless. And she said, and I can't decide if I want to go to Russia or China. That's because that's what I was doing at the time. And I said, your mother went to Colorado. And she said that times had changed.
And I think it's interesting that you make them do some research, right, before they go on this trip?
Yeah, they have to justify. I got more and more sophisticated as we went. So with Nina, we negotiated. We went to London and we did all kinds of great things. But by the 3rd or 4th trip, they were researching where they wanted to go. They were justifying it. They were coming back and doing presentations to their cousins. They would conspire with each other. So they would do one up on the next one. It's been a really interesting whole part of their life.
And I got a strong sense from the book that you did have a supportive husband and children that allowed you to move forward in whatever next decisions were happening in your career.
Well, this is going to sound terrible on a program when we're talking about women's empowerment. My parents were both born in Poland. My mother was raised in Cuba. She went to Cuba when she was like 4, and her siblings were born in Cuba. The Spanish culture really does put the husband, the father at the center of the universe, of the family. And it was difficult, I think, for my mother to see daughter who's like defying all the rules.
One beautiful sentence that you used, and I'm going to ask you about it, is to learn to dance between the raindrops. And you referred to this while you were traveling with a semi-pro football team. And it was just a description of how you learned to manage being a female, but in a male-dominated environment. It's a really well-described sentence. I want you to tell me more about that.
It's funny to even think back on it, but we were in this small town. It was a mining town. And when the mines closed, the miners used to play football for recreation. And they were really good, and it was camaraderie and everything else. And my dad used to announce the games. So I used to spot for the team. I was a young lady, one might say. And these were pretty aggressive people. And I think learning to befriend the players and walk that fine line between getting their respect, but also being physically attracted or physically attractive, I think was dancing between raindrops at times, because if my father ever knew some of the things that were said to me, he would have taken me off that plane in 2 seconds. That's how you grow up. And it did teach me a lot about handling myself. It made coming to Washington and dealing with the establishment in Washington actually pretty easy by comparison.
Yeah, because even in Washington in the 60s and 70s, I imagine you were one of the only women working within a group of men who were in law firms and government positions. Tell me about the perspective that you had when you walked into these board meetings with men, and how were you treated and how did you feel? Was there a crisis of confidence at any point?
There was a little bit of all of that, but I think how you handle yourself is so much a part of how successful you can be in moments like that. So I always wanted to be the most prepared one in the room or have the best idea, even though a lot of other people take credit for your idea. The old adage, if a woman says something, it's okay. And then the next person says it, the guy says it, and they say, oh, what a great idea. I tell all the guys at APCO when that happens, they should stand up and say, oh, but she just said that, to try to help their female colleagues. If I was going to be the only woman in the room, I knew I would be remembered because I didn't look like everyone else, but I wanted to be remembered as somebody who really added a lot to the meeting, because I thought it was really important not to just sit there. And also I had an opportunity to be distinct from everybody else. I wanted to be distinct for the right reasons. And so that was my attitude. And then a little bit later, when APCO started and we were part of Arnold & Porter, which had all these very highly trained and educated lawyers from a lot of famous schools, and I grew up in this little town, I just realized one day that I was my own worst enemy when I doubted myself. And I was helping my son with his homework one day, and we came across this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, that nobody can make you feel inferior without your own consent. And
wow, yes.
Through my whole life, every time I walk in that room and gasp, I think about it, because it's true. Nobody can make you feel inferior without your own consent. And one reason I wrote the book, actually, is that I wanted to make it safe for other women to, or especially young girls, to be able to talk about bringing their whole self to work. And what you do at home and what you learn at home is really important to the workplace. It defines how you use your time and how you relate to people and how you create values and all those things. And I thought that what a shame that we've made that for so long something that nobody should talk about.
There are lessons that we learn through our family life that we can then transpose onto work life. And what you were saying about your son, does it go full circle from what you experienced with your father working with him?
My parents we lived in a town of 3,000 people. In fact, my school was K through 12 in one building. What I learned from my father is that he had the general store in town. So it was like a mini department store, really small, but it's where everybody shopped. And there were relationships that were built because my dad, that was before credit cards, and my dad did a lot of things on a handshake, or we'd have this file with what everybody owed and you'd add to it and then you'd take away from it or whatever. And it wasn't until he died, I think, that this lesson was driven home. And maybe it was intuitive, I just took it for granted. But people would say, I would never have gotten married if it wasn't for your dad. I said, what do you mean? I said, I needed to buy an engagement ring and I had no money. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, things like that. And they bring tears to your eyes because you never realized the power of relationships. And I think that was the most important lesson I learned from my dad, because the business was different and hard work. That business was open 6 days a week for 12 hours a day. And that's why we all participated in working in the store from the time we could see over the counter. That was an important part of my life, an important part of my experience.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and get back more into, because it's so fascinating, by the way. I love talking about all the family aspect and things, but I do want to focus a little bit also on APCO. And you were chosen by some of the seniors at A&P.
There were a group of partners at Arnold & Porter that did more project development than practicing law. So they did really creative, innovative things and affordable housing at universities, or they were involved in helping set up the National Captioning Institute when they worked for PBS. And I met the person who was the lead attorney doing that. And one thing led to another. It took me a long time to decide to leave. And you talk about family influence. When I was with Close Up, which I helped start, which is this program for high school students to learn about government and politics by coming to Washington. It's now had 1 million kids. It's a fabulous program. And I felt like I was leaving family. And years there, I helped start it. I had a lot of people working for me. I was only 38 at the time. And I was driving my son to school one day, and he was in high school at that time. And he said, "Mom, I don't know why you're agonizing about this. If you really want to do it, just go for it." And when I went to Arnold and Porter, this group of partners, every project they did was maybe 20% legal work and the rest was non-legal. And they would assemble non-legal professionals each time they were doing a big project like that. And they decided that it would be great to have a consulting affiliate where they could aggregate talented non-legal professionals to be partners with them in these projects. And that's how this started. And they came to me and asked if I would put this together and run it. And I had people who actually did say, "No offense, but why you?"
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Because I think when you work in the not-for-profit world, they don't realize that all the things you've done to build an organization, which was a startup, which became a very successful educational foundation. It was quite funny but people actually said that to me, yes.
You sure showed them.
Operating out of fear is one way to get the job done.
Absolutely. When I registered my company, the guy told me at the little counter there, he stamped my papers and he said, "Good luck to you, little girl. After 50% of people fail after 2 years." And he hands over the papers. I'm like, "I'm not going to be one of them." And I walked. That was the kick in the pants.
I do think you have to thick skin in a way. Can't, just like you did, Catherine. And I really respect that. It's if you have a passion, if you have a vision for what you want to do, and you have the fortitude to take it forward, the worst thing that can happen is you do fail. And what did you learn from it? But I've always turned it on its head. I think one of the things I learned the most, which I hope everybody, not just women listening, is that to never underestimate the power of being underestimated. And I think that for me, that has been my lifeblood in a way, that every time I got patted on the head or sent away, little girl, it just gives you that much more fortitude to do this. When I got there, I realized there wasn't really a business plan and there wasn't a client base. And I had left at that time. Close Up had I had 200 people working for me. So it was quite a shock to be in a place and have a half a secretary and a mission and no resources. Little by little, I figured out that I should do what I'm good at doing. And I really was good at connecting dots and solving problems. And so APCO became this place with taking on these very eclectic things where we would help solve problems. That's how it started, and it was just me. And then the Washington office grew to eventually to 20 people, but it took me 7 years to do that. So it wasn't like this was automatic. When you think about APCO today with 1,000 people, the first 7 years was tough. And I realized that doing this inside another company is very hard, especially a law firm with its own rules and regulations. And in 2004, we did a management buyout of the shares of our company at that point, we were affiliated with this public company, and they hired an investment banker. And I said right from the beginning that I'm going to do a management buyout. And they laughed at me. Like, you have to raise more than 50 cents. And the whole time they paid no attention at all. And they thought this was silly. And then they called me up when it was blind bids. And they said, "Okay, this is who you're going to work for." We opened the envelopes and blah, blah, blah. And I said, "I don't think so." And they kept getting louder and more ornery about it. And I finally said, "Did you read my contract?" And because they were, what I want to say, condescending, I think they never thought to read the contract. My contract had a provision that I had to approve the buyer.
Oh, lovely.
Of those shares. Yes. So I just waited it out and did the management buyout.
And for those who don't know what a management buyout is, can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, it was just if there was going to be a transaction that changed the ownership of a company, in this case, buying the majority shares out of another company, you can buy those. But if the management team in place tries to be the buyer, they have to organize, get the financing, and then make an offer the same way an outside investor would to buy those shares and own those shares. That's why today my company, APCO, is majority employee owned, because we were able to do this buyout. And while I'm the largest shareholder, I was able to set aside shares as people became more senior in the company and more embedded in our future.
So you really care about the employees. You care about their happiness within the company. And it's not just about you or about the bottom line. There's obviously a lot of care and importance that is given to happy clients, fulfilled staff, and profitable company.
That's my three-legged stool. I said, if you pull any one of those legs out, the stool will fall over.
But let me just ask you quickly, you made a comment about a bully in the workplace. I want you to tell me about that and how you dealt with him.
This person is, with respect, now deceased, but he was definitely a big bully. So one day we were standing in the hall or in this open area, and there were a lot of staff around. And he was very angry about something, like foaming at the mouth angry. And he started berating me in front of everybody else. So I just pulled him into his office and I said, you know, what you just did, you demeaned yourself in front of all those people because they respect me. And after you do that, it's really a reflection on you. And so I'm telling you that. And I'm also telling you, if you ever do that again, I'm out of here. So it never happened again.
And that makes a lot of sense, because when you were describing how you moved forward in your business life, you keep referring to the value of trust and fair treatment in relationships in business. Tell me more about how that shaped itself, and then were there any disappointments that came out of that?
There are always disappointments that come out of trust, because not everybody shares that as a value. But I think for me, I've always done a lot of things on the basis of trusted relationships. And that's been more of a currency for me that in my life than maybe it should be from time to time. And I think that the place where I was most disappointed is I had an experience when I did a management buyout for APCO, and I brought one of my most trusted and valued friends, who was also a very, very good at being fair and even-handed. And I thought, I brought him on the board, and he was the independent director. And when I got in crosshairs with my investors at that point, who really tried to take advantage of the situation, I won't say they bought him off, but they enticed him in a different direction after 30 years of a friendship. And I've never recovered from that fully, because I think that at the end of the day, trust is so important. I couldn't ever imagine doing that in reverse, ever. It just wouldn't have been worth it. I just would never have seen that. It's a hard lesson to learn, but I did learn from it. And it's made me maybe not cynical, but more careful. But I did not see that coming.
It's a hard pill to swallow, I think.
It's a very hard one. It's still, I think as I look back on my career, and so many wonderful things have happened, and I've built so many trusted relationships, that the ones that don't work that way really do stand out, because it's such a contrast to the way you live your life, the kind of relationships you build.
But it is a minority, isn't it?
Yes, thank goodness. I'm still an optimistic person, and I think at the end of the day, you have to get up and look in the mirror. And I think if you feel comfortable with who and what that person represents, I think that's all you can do. And you can't account for, I learned a long time ago not to obsess over things I can't control. And I can't control someone else's behavior.
We were talking a lot about APCO and how you have multiple around the world. And you made a point of saying that some of your employees were actually part of international exchange programs, and that's fascinating.
So I came up with this idea as we were building more offices. I was the one who knew the people in the other countries that it would be great to have more integration. And so we started a program that for the people below a certain level in the company, not the most senior people, but maybe mid-level to junior, that if they wanted to go work in another office, and we formalized it through this exchange program, and we made it 3 weeks because we thought that was the least discriminatory thing to do. It's enough time that you get a feel, but not enough time that you lose your status in your own office. And also for people who are married or if they had other obligations, it was still doable. And in the beginning, APCO had no money, so we had homestays. People actually went and stayed with other people in their home. So you talk about having an exchange. That was quite the experience. But then as it's gotten more professionalized, it's very popular still in the company. And we encourage people to do it because they come back with a much better understanding, not just of that country or that city, but of their colleagues, but of the world. You just look at things a little differently.
And I'm very curious to know from your standpoint, how did it make a difference in the world? What's the impact been?
We are a company of very eclectic backgrounds. We have people who came from policy, politics, business, NGOs. And so the idea that there'd be a common way of operating, probably, or that people would just automatically agree. I think we get a better product through the disagreements we have when we try to do strategy. What I think has to be aligned are things like mutual respect, about dealing with empathy, about being bold in your solutions. These are some of the values of APCO. Inclusive. Those are things we can all agree on if we don't agree on strategy and tactics. And then if we agree on those things, then coming together to argue about strategy and tactics takes on a whole different thing, because that's in the interest of performing the job. And we still may not agree on all of that. But I think there's two different levels here of engagement that are important. And that's why I think we're better served by having this eclectic group of people working on things, that not everybody is single-minded, and that there's an environment that allows people to disagree without being disagreeable. My aspiration, I'll say, and as I've thought about all of this, was to create a place where we could solve some of the bigger problems of the world in our own little way, but also people could grow their careers and grow as people, and we could gently nudge our clients to doing things that are in the better interests of the world. It was very lofty in a way, but I think for the most part, we do that. I think one of the things that we're able to do is we serve as a navigation tool for a lot of our clients. We help them navigate the growing complexities of the world, to understand other cultures. You can only do that by having what I call a very global operation, that you are global in your outlook, but you're very local in understanding what works and doesn't work in a given marketplace. And I think learning to respect other cultures as part of our principles of operation, it was like, while there might be a common solution, how it gets explained and how it gets activated is really a matter of understanding local cultures. The other part of it is the compass of helping companies find their way to purpose, and to find it in a way to improve the lives of the people that the company serves, all their stakeholders, whether they're employees or whether they're customers. And so I think we're very good at that. And it makes me very proud when we're able to accomplish things for our clients that other people thought were impossible.
Many thanks to Margery Kraus. Her book, Roots and Wings, 10 Lessons of Motherhood That Helped Me Create and Run a Company, is available wherever you get your books. And So She Left is made by Cansulta and Ethan Lee. We'll be back next Wednesday with a new episode. Music by Chris Zabriskie, edited for your enjoyment. You can find a list of all the songs you heard here in the episode notes. I'm Catherine Vasilopoulos, and thanks for listening.